Well, thanks very much, Steve. I appreciate the invitation. And this really is a bit like going back to the high school reunion. I think Frank Lind was saying, yeah, it's like a high school reunion, a wedding, all in one. It is a lot of fun to be back, and I feel so fortunate that I can count so many of you as friends. A number of you became friends when we were each other's punching targets in some regulatory proceeding or another, and we've had a lot of fun with that over the years. And that's how this industry is. You make friends, sometimes you debate a lot, but the important thing is I think all of us, really all of us, have one thing in mind, and it's to make sure we're each doing our part to have an electric system that's serving customers in California. These are real people with real power and also imaginary power, right, the engineers, reactive power. And do it affordably and do it in a way that's sensitive to the environment. Now, before I go too much farther, I must say this, I don't know about this idea of having me speak in the middle of some sort of baseball game that's going on. And so those of you who know me know that I like running a lot, but I'm not a big sports guy. So when Gary Ackerman gave me this Giants cap, I thought he was making fun of my height. So, because that's what Gary would do. So I want to put it right here, Gary. And just to remind me of that, and I understand that most of the room are Giants fans, so we'll make this quick, and you can go see the end of the game. Steve mentioned where I've been recently, and so that really does give me a perspective that I value. I've been on the regulated side for a number of years, as many of you know. I just spent 3.25 years on the, I wouldn't call it the unregulated side. It's still very regulated, but it's a competitive side, all right? And so I was joking at the table, but it's not really truly a joke. It was interesting to see life as a wholesale customer of Edison, right? When we were developing Walnut Creek and we were going through the interconnection process. And so Pete Dietrich is here, who heads up T&D at Edison. I may have a couple of ideas on the interconnection process. It is great to see the world from at least two sides on the industry, and I know there are many more. And you know what? It's hard work on all sides. But again, it's important work. Now, coming back to SCE is special because, again, I have a lot of friends there, and there is this sense of mission to the place that's real, and I think, a lot of you share that across the industry in your respective roles. But it's a very different world in a lot of ways, and it's a world after songs. And so the loss of the nuclear plant, whether, I recognize we'll have folks on all sides of the equation here, some folks who, view nuclear power as an important tool for addressing greenhouse gases, some folks who view it as something they don't want. So I respect that, but the reality is that the world after songs is a very different world. And so SCE is very different. Now, SCE it's less than 20% of our energy needs are met from our own generating stations. All right, so that makes us much more of a wires company. We still have generation, still important, still valuable. We're glad that we have it there. But really, the bulk of the focus of the company is on the growth and through the wire side. That creates a lot of challenges and opportunities in terms of how we meet customer demand with clean, efficient resources. And in a way that can give customers choice. Now, Steve mentioned David Crane couldn't make it. So you might imagine I got to know David through the transaction where NRG purchased the operating assets of EMA. And I have a lot of respect for David. At the same time, I have some disagreements with David. Right? And David enjoyed Diane Feldman is just laughing already. We won't say which side of the equation you're on, NRG, all NRG. I have heard David talk about, on the one hand, utilities are his customers, but on the other hand, I think there's a fundamental view that's not just David, but a number of folks sometimes espouse that somehow the new world that's coming, and it is coming, right? And frankly, it's exciting that it's coming, but that new world will be a utility-free world. Maybe he doesn't say it quite that sharply. But there is this sense that you hear that utilities are, the horse cart and buggy whip. Well, that's an interesting one because I just had this unique opportunity when I tried out early retirement for a while and was trying to think about what I was going to do next, and I got the call from Edison. And to be honest with you, I thought very hard about that strategic question. Right? because I had no interest in going and rejoining a company that might just turn into the horse cart and buggy whip provider. It's not. Okay? And the analogy I like using, and I know it's imperfect, and those of you who know more about IT than I do can, start throwing bread rolls at me. But the analogy I like is that I remember clearly, 20 years ago, people talking about large computers and the death of large computers. It was coming. PCs were cheap. They were powerful. They were getting more and more powerful. So who the heck needed a large computer anymore? So let's fast forward now. Very different world in terms of, systems. There is this thing called the internet. Guess what? There's some pretty massive large computers around involved. There's the servers. There's the cloud, right? They enable, all the apps that mobile devices and distributed resources, run on. I know it's not a perfect analogy, but there's something in there for me in that there's a need for infrastructure, whether you're talking about IT or whether you're talking about the energy space. And I think on the utility side, it's our responsibility, it's our obligation to make sure that we are doing our part of helping this new energy world develop. It will be very different from today. There's no doubt about that. It will have a lot more technology. It will have more choices for customers. I know that at times, probably utilities sometimes don't move as quickly as I think, certainly as I know I would like. But the reality is that at Edison, we are really moving from thinking about just about the concerns, and there are concerns, right? We care about making sure that the power is reliable and it's affordable and it's environmentally sensitive. But we really are, wanting to adopt the mindset of how do we play an important and critical and crucial role in enabling this new world that's coming, right? I think that's our obligation, right? And that's part of serving customers. And some of those technologies, we may have a part in providing them. A lot of those technologies, we won't have a part in providing them, but we will have a big part in enabling them. And we'll have a big part in helping society optimize economics across all these different choices. And so I'm excited about it. Again, I thought long and hard about it before signing back up. And yes, in the end, I left the shorts and the flip-flops behind and put on shoes and socks again. It is one of my adjustment things. Still haven't quite adjusted to it, but the idea of going to Edison and helping make it a leading utility, not just for today, but for the next generation, was just too attractive to pass up. I want to talk a bit then about this new world in the context of some of the things that are happening in more near term in California. And so in that, I'll talk a little bit about things Edison is doing, but frankly, things that all of us need to do here. And I think one of the things that has changed over the last decade is the increasing focus on the environment, not just in terms of renewables, but thinking about the broader issue of greenhouse gas reduction. And so in my book, that needs to continue to be one of the primary goals of the actions that we all take together as an industry. And that's going to require alignment between utilities, regulators, generators, alternative suppliers, you name it. Again, as we make all those changes, though, we need to make sure that we don't forget that people want the lights to go on when the switch gets flipped. They want that power to be affordable. They want it to be environmentally sensitive. And overall, they want it to be safe for the employees of all our companies and safe for our public. So now, this theme about empowering customers, let me drop down a little bit and talk about what we're doing about it as SCE. We're investing a lot of money right now. So our capital spend right now is around $4 billion a year. It's a rate case pending, so we won't go into any sort of ex parte discussions on the case. But we're spending $4 billion a year, and well over half of that is on the distribution side, right? And a lot of that is for improving the grid and helping customers leverage new technologies, whether it's smart meters or whether it's storage or distributed generation. More and more, that will be a big part of the planning that we need to do as a distribution system operator. We need to enable that technology and transactions for our customers. So you all know that already we're well on the road to integrating 33% renewables. And by the way, add to that about 580 megawatts of storage that we'll have on the system. And add to that the fact that we have a lot of electric vehicles coming online. I'm on my second one right now. I think it's the right technology. We might have as many as 350,000 electric vehicles in our service territory by 2020. assuming that we get the right kind of regulatory support. That's going to require a different way of using the grid. Two-way power flows, which I know you've all heard before, but this is a big deal. This grid was designed for one-way transmission and distribution. Two-way, it's not just about the technology, it's about safety, right? The safety of our public, the safety of our employees. We need to install technologies like dynamic voltage control. We need to make sure that we're doing our part to have support transparency in the wholesale market, to facilitate customer choice, to have third-party entities that can process transactions and can support the use of distributed resources. So a lot of pieces and parts that end up hanging off of this grid that we are fortunate to have a responsibility to manage. There's one program that we have right now that probably you've heard about, but I want to chat a little bit about, and that's our preferred resources pilot. Because to me, that's a really nice application that's bringing together a lot of these technologies in a larger way, more present way than anything else we've seen out there. And the backdrop for that, in a lot of ways, is in the retirement of San Onofre, as well as the exit of once-through cooling units that's coming to a theater near you. That really creates some opportunities to test the deployment, early deployment of a number of distributed resources. So through our preferred resources pilot, we have this area in Orange County where we are using our procurement tools to go off and look at resources like solar energy and energy efficiency and storage, and really test how those resources can come together, can get integrated to meet local capacity requirements. Again, at a scale that we really haven't been able to do before. We're talking about displacing the need for something like 300 megawatts of traditional incremental gas-fired resources in the next 8 to 10 years. So I'm excited about that, and I think that's emblematic of a lot of the actions that the state is trying to take. So that's all a nice start, right, for Edison, for the state more broadly. But let's face it, I think all of us need to do more. And again, going back to the umbrella of carbon emissions reduction, all the efforts we've undertaken to reduce carbon emissions in California are a good start. A lot of the focus has been on increasing renewable energy and ramping up energy efficiency, and that started really with serious intent in the middle of the last decade. So we can take, as a state, a lot of credit for the increase in wind and solar and biomass and geothermal, and we really have led that for the nation. But maybe being a little provocative here, as I've watched this movie continue to unfold, I become concerned by what I see are increasingly prescriptive, frankly limiting constraints. And so, this idea of continuing to develop point solutions with point requirements and this standard and that standard, that's just really hard to manage. And from an efficiency perspective alone, I mean, it's costly to try and manage that kind of approach. Renewable portfolio standards do seem to get the most policymaker attention as a vehicle to reduce carbon emissions. But again, we've been there, we've done that. We're layering on, pancake upon pancake of these requirements. And so I think it's time to move on to new solutions that look more broadly at the need for clean energy. And then let technologies compete and let, the technology with the best economics rise to the top. Here's 3 examples that jump out at me. How about looking at the carbon reduction benefits of energy efficiency? Secondly, how about looking at the benefits that come when utilities help enable installation of customer-installed solar? And third, which is maybe the largest, how about looking at some recognition for the effort that we will play as a utility for enabling the electrification of transportation? So let me just dive into each of those quickly here. On the energy efficiency side, we all get it. I think the state has been the leader in recognizing that carbon reduction that comes from energy efficiency programs is great carbon reduction. But we also layer a lot of controls on that. And I know we need controls. I know we need measurement and verification programs. But the structure we have right now can get pretty onerous. I think in some cases we have triple redundant reviews of whether that light bulb really, helps save, energy. And so that, I think, places some barriers and constraints in terms of not just what the utilities are doing, but what third parties are able to do in the market. So I think it's, time to better recognize energy efficiency's greenhouse gas reduction benefits and help regulators and policymakers and builders and building owners and customers all work together to make energy efficiency happen in a more intense way. We need to get, for example, the building industry and the utilities and customers all on the same side of the table to support more efficient building standards, and also for not only for new buildings but for retrofits. But again, I think doing that in a way that's also recognizing the benefit that has to greenhouse gas reduction and including it under an umbrella is the way to go. Let's talk about customer-installed solar as that second example. Sometimes it does feel a little bit like there's a total disconnect between greenhouse gas reduction and customer-installed solar. I mean, when you think about the utility programs for large-scale solar, we do a lot in terms of the procurement for large-scale solar. We do see, though, that there's growing opposition from environmental organizations, whether it's for installing a large solar field or developing the transmission that's required. Yet there's recognition for our efforts, right, and our efforts on behalf of customers because it's a renewable portfolio standard. And so there's counting credit that we're getting against that RPS. It doesn't feel like we have the same case in terms of distributed solar that's installed at customer locations on our distribution system, right? And by the way, we, on behalf of our customers, and paid for by our customers, are investing a lot of dollars, as I said, on upgrading our distribution systems and metering and interconnections and all that to help customers install DG solar. So we'll keep on moving that way, but I think it'll be important to figure out a way to have the framework recognize that that's good not only because it's some sort of mandate, but that's good because it helps to reduce greenhouse gases. And so somehow figuring a way to get credit for that built into the system is important. Let's talk about vehicles. The state has a goal of 1 million zero-emission vehicles by 2020, 1.5 million by 2025. We're nowhere close to that number. Don't think, unless we change our approach, it's probably not going to happen. And more importantly, if we're really going to go after 80% reductions in 1990 greenhouse gas levels by 2050, we're going to need a lot more than that. Probably need 5 or 6 million ZEVs on the road by 2030. So that's 2030 is only 15 years from now, and finding out that as the aging process moves on, there's some sort of time dilation thing that happens, and 15 years just does not seem like that long anymore. Unlike for my 10-year-old, where that's just, you can't, Dad, you're so old. We're going to need to undertake a lot of investment, right, in order to be able to have customers have the ability to charge their vehicles at the locations where they need it, whether it's, long dwell places, their house or their apartment building or their workplace. That's going to require a lot of investment in the distribution system to fuel all those electric vehicles. Okay? We're moving there. We have proposals that will be advancing at the PUC, but we really don't have a vehicle today to appropriately recognize the greenhouse gas reductions that come from that, and frankly, to figure out how we share allocation of those benefits between the electric sector and the transportation sector. So I don't have the answer here, but I can tell you this is one that we think is important. And so I take all these three little examples and I put them under a broader umbrella of, I think California needs a clean energy standard, right? Because that's the way to reintegrate all these different pieces. And again, let the technologies compete. Let economics, come to the rise, and let, frankly, the market help us figure out the most cost-effective approach to achieve the greenhouse gas reductions that we need. Now, I've been talking at a pretty high level about the state. I've been talking a lot about the utilities, but I'm here at the invitation of the ISO, and so it's time to pick on Steve. Actually, with the GMCs we pay, it's always time to pick on Steve. I had to say that, right? Okay. So, this is going to create a lot of challenge for the ISO, right? And we were talking at the dinner table, as we get more and more intermittent resources, as we get more distributed resources, how the Cal ISO continues to run one of the most advanced energy markets in the world, as it can no longer point to the following, 27 or 30 big stations as a big source of power, but it's really having to point to thousands of different points in the system as the sources of power. That's going to make life more difficult. I think we need collaboration there. But there's also an opportunity there because we need to figure out how to enable this for customers. I think, one of the steps that the ISO has been taking in terms of virtually in expanding its footprint through the energy imbalance market is just outstanding. And it's one of the things I was really happy to see on my return, that we are picking up scale. It may not be by expanding the ISO per se, but by expanding its relationships with other balancing authorities. I think the efforts that ISO has in terms of facilitating competition, very helpful as well. And, whether it's through the FERC Order 1000 process, to have real transmission competition. I know this may sound weird coming from a utility guy, but again, I've been on both sides of this. I think markets work and competition is good, and frankly, it makes everybody sharpen their pencils. But as long as we can do that in a way that maintains the grid reliable and supports and the enhancing of clean energy and reduction of carbon. And then, a lot of credit to the ISO for the market transparency that they provide. Let's face it, the market we have today is very different from the market that we had 10 years ago. And I think that helps all of us. But Steve, what have you done for us lately? So even with all these accomplishments, the reality is that we're going to have a lot of technologies coming our way that haven't even been imagined yet. And so we're going to need an ISO, and frankly, it's not just on them, but it's on all of us as the ISO stakeholders to be adaptable, to be ready to work on different solutions. The preferred resources pilot that we're running, I think, is going to be a nice little test bed for how we deal with some of these system issues as we have a very different basket of resources serving customers on a part of the system. We're going to need new tools, whether it's new tools for recognizing the collective resource adequacy value of preferred resources, so whether it's new tools for thinking about customer net load as you have EVs and preferred resources hanging off the system. There's going to be some new business models and new tools that we need. Now, that's exciting, though, right? Because a big opportunity there. It's an intellectual candy, for a lot of us, but it's also important work. A lot of that, though, is still, let's face it, in terms of big scale, it's still out in the future a ways. It's becoming real. It's happening now. It's ramping up, but it's not changing the system in a wholesale basis, probably in the next 5 years. It might be more of a 10 or 15-year kind of view. We do have one other change, though, that's much more near and present, and that's going to be vital to all of us in to keeping the lights on. And that's worrying about resource adequacy as we go finally through the much-awaited migration out of the once-through cooling plants. Okay. And so this is a concern point for me, because as I look at how challenging it is to build new resources in this state, again, I had the privilege of being associated with the Walnut Creek development through EME. Man, oh man, it's hard to do business like that in California, right? And it took a Herculean effort, and frankly, a lot of you in the room, on the policy side, were tremendously helpful in recognizing that we needed to work through all the processes of the state, but, pulling together the transmission interconnection piece, the air quality, permit piece, water, all these things, it's a hard thing to do. And you know what? I'm afraid we're going to have to do that several more times. We, the system, are going to have to do that several more times over the next several years as once-through cooling plants depart the system. Now, I think it's, and there's the question of how do you accomplish that, all right? How do you help the markets get there and provide the investment necessary to build the units that I think we'll need to provide a bridge to a later date when maybe preferred resources can carry more of that load in a larger way. I think it's no secret that, I personally and my company have had we like markets. We have a good view of markets. We've been proponents of capacity markets. I just came off of an experience where I spent a lot of my time living in PJM. That worked. I also recognize that that's not where the state is today, and I respect it. Okay? But we need to then figure something else out to make sure that we can get the capacity built that's needed when it's needed before the once-through cooling plants end up retiring. And this, sadly, we're not Walmart dealing with Procter & Gamble, able to make sure that the toilet paper gets to us just in time. Okay, we don't have the ability to have deliveries happen in a matter of weeks. This process of building new plants takes years. And so I think, it's going to have to start with the ISO, the PUC, the utilities, other market participants, firmly establishing what the need is that we have for the state over the next decade, and then figuring out yet another interim solution. May not be the nirvana that we all want to end up in, but we'll need to figure out some interim solution to make sure that we are supporting the development of new capacity that I suspect we'll find is needed in order to maintain reliability in the system over the next decade. That can then give us some breathing room until the technologies advance and preferred resources can play a larger role in terms of maintaining reliability of the system. So, it's a lot of challenges there. I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities too. I think it's one of the things that I am very happy and pleased about is that I know there's a lot of talent in this room and in this state to address this together. Quite frankly, part of my personal math as I thought about the return to Edison wasn't just about the company itself. A lot of you figured into my personal math. I think all of us want to have a challenge, but none of us want to go into a situation that's going to be, by definition, a failure. So I think we have the makings for success here. It's going to take a level of collaboration that we haven't seen yet in this state. And I pledged, my personal commitment and the commitment of my company to be a constructive partner, with all of you to give customers the future that they want. It's a future that's very different. It's exciting. It's going to be technology-driven, but it still needs to keep the lights on. And it still needs to be affordable and safe. So with that, thanks a lot for your time. And Gary, thank you. And I hope, but for all you Giants fans, I hope they're doing okay. I have a feeling there's going to be do we have a score? 7-2. And who has the 7? Okay, I'll leave quietly then.